My name is Scarlett, and at 29, I've built a successful career as a graphic designer, though my achievements have always felt hollow without my family's recognition. I've spent most of my life feeling like an outsider in my own home. Yesterday, I discovered my parents and brother went on a luxury cruise to the Bahamas without even telling me. When I finally worked up the courage to ask why I wasn't invited, my mother's words cut deeper than any knife. This is for people who matter to us. If you've ever felt rejected by the people who should love you most, drop your location in the comments, hit subscribe, and join me as I share how I finally broke free from a lifetime of feeling invisible. I grew up in a beautiful colonial house in a Boston suburb with perfectly manicured lawns that matched my parents' perfectly manicured expectations. My father, James, built his empire as an investment banker, coming home late most nights with his briefcase and perpetually furrowed brow. My mother, Diana, maintained her position in the social hierarchy as both a top-selling real estate agent and the quintessential supporter of my younger brother, Nathan. Nathan. Just saying his name brings back the familiar ache. 2 years my junior, but miles ahead in our parents' eyes. Nathan was the golden child from the moment he took his first steps. Where I was bookish and reserved, he was outgoing and athletic. Where I was cautious and thoughtful, he was bold and spontaneous. These differences shouldn't have mattered in a healthy family, but in ours, they defined our worth. I remember sitting at our mahogany dining table at age 8, proudly displaying my straight-A report card. My father glanced at it, briefly nodded, and said, "That's what we expect, Scarlett." Just moments later, Nathan bounced in with a report card sprinkled with B's and C's, and suddenly the room transformed. My parents erupted in praise, my father lifting Nathan onto his shoulders, while my mother called my grandparents to announce his improvement. That pattern continued through every milestone. When I won the state art competition at 12, my mother framed the certificate and placed it on the bookshelf in the guest room. When Nathan scored a single goal in his soccer game that same week, they took the entire family out for a celebration dinner and hung his team photo prominently in the living room. I tried everything to earn their approval. I joined clubs, volunteered, maintained perfect grades, stayed out of trouble. By 16, I was exhausted from the constant striving. But I didn't know how to stop. The worst part wasn't the favoritism itself, but how everyone pretended it didn't exist. When I once tearfully asked my mother why Nathan got more attention, she looked genuinely confused. "We treat you both exactly the same, Scarlett. Don't be dramatic." High school graduation should have been my moment. I was valedictorian, had secured a partial scholarship to Rhode Island School of Design, and had just been published in a national young artist magazine. My speech received a standing ovation, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe my parents would finally see me. After the ceremony, I watched as they presented Nathan with keys to a brand new car, a congratulatory gift for maintaining a B average and getting accepted to Cornell through legacy admission. My gift was a $100 gift card to an art supply store handed to me almost as an afterthought. "You'll need these for college," my father said, not meeting my eyes. I remember forcing a smile while something hardened inside me. College was both liberation and struggle. While Nathan's apartment tuition and expenses were fully covered, I worked 2 part-time jobs between classes to cover what my scholarship didn't. During holiday breaks, I'd return home to hear endless stories about Nathan's fraternity adventures and connections he was making while questions about my artwork or academic achievements were scarce. By graduation, I'd secured an internship at a boutique design firm in Boston, determined to prove my worth through professional success, if not through family validation. I worked 80-hour weeks, ate ramen to save money, and slowly built a reputation for innovative designs. When I landed my first major client, a national beverage company, I called my parents excitedly. "That's nice, honey," my mother said distractedly. "Did you hear Nathan might be dating a senator's daughter?" The pattern continued into my late 20s. Sunday dinners at my parents' house became exercises in invisibility. I'd sit at the table listening to my family discuss Nathan's life in excruciating detail, while fielding occasional questions about whether I was still doing those drawings. I maintained the relationship out of some misguided sense of obligation, convincing myself that family was family even when it hurt. What I didn't realize then was how deeply I'd normalized being treated as an afterthought. I didn't know that families could be different, that love shouldn't have to be earned, that parents could celebrate their children equally, that education was still coming, and it would arrive in the most painful way possible. It was a random Tuesday evening when my world shifted. I was scrolling through Instagram after a long day of client meetings, half watching a cooking show, and thinking about deadlines. Then Nathan's profile appeared on my feed, something that had become increasingly rare as he'd become more selective about what he shared with me. The photos stopped me cold. Crystal blue waters, a massive luxury cruise ship sunset dinners on private balconies. My brother sipping champagne with my parents, all three of them dressed in resort wear I'd never seen before. Their smiles were wide, relaxed, genuine. They looked happy, happier than I'd seen them at any family gathering in years. More photos appeared as I scrolled them, swimming with dolphins, exploring an island, enjoying a formal captain's dinner. My mother, wearing a new dress I complimented when we had lunch just 3 weeks ago, was beaming next to my father in a tropical setting. "Family time is the best time," read one caption under a photo of the three of them toasting at sunset. Family time. But I was family too, wasn't I? My first thought was confusion. Had I forgotten about a trip? Had they mentioned it and I somehow missed it? I quickly scrolled back through texts and emails, finding nothing. My second thought was that perhaps it was a last-minute opportunity, a cancellation they jumped on. I texted Nathan casually. "Those cruise pics look amazing. When did you guys go?" His response came quickly. "Oh yeah, Mom and Dad wanted to treat me after my promotion. It was last minute, just got back yesterday." Something didn't add up. The photos showed at least a week's worth of activities. And that dress my mother was wearing, she'd had it for weeks. On a hunch, I clicked on a different photo, one where they were posed in front of the ship. I zoomed in on the boarding passes in my father's shirt pocket. Though blurry, I could make out a date from over a month ago. This wasn't last minute. This was planned. Planned without me. I spent the next 2 hours in a detective-like frenzy. I found comments from my mother's friends from weeks ago, asking if she was excited for the family cruise. I discovered a Facebook check-in from my father at the cruise line's office downtown, dated 3 months earlier. And finally, the crushing evidence: an email my mother had accidentally copied me on 2 months ago about the 3 tickets for the Bahamas trip, which I'd dismissed at the time as not meant for me. They hadn't forgotten to invite me. They had chosen not to. The realization hit me physically. A hollowing out of my chest, a ringing in my ears. I spent that night alternating between tears and a strange numb calm. By morning, I knew I had to confront them. No more pretending, no more accepting scraps of attention. I needed to hear them say it. Sunday dinner was just 4 days away. I considered calling sooner, but decided the conversation needed to happen in person. I needed to see their faces when they explained. Those 4 days were torture. I slept poorly rehearsed confrontations in my head and drafted and deleted dozens of texts. At work, I made careless mistakes that weren't like me. My closest colleague Taylor noticed something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. How do you tell someone that your family doesn't consider you family? Sunday arrived with perfect New England fall weather. Crisp air, golden leaves, the kind of day that should bring comfort. I drove to my parents' house with a knot in my stomach so tight I could barely breathe. As I pulled into the driveway, I caught sight of myself in the rearview mirror, eyes slightly swollen from crying, jaw set with determination. "Just ask the question," I whispered to myself. "You deserve an answer." The roast chicken was dry that night, or maybe it just seemed that way because I could barely swallow. My mother moved around the dining room with her usual efficiency. My father discussed the stock market, and Nathan dominated the conversation with stories from his financial firm. No one mentioned the cruise until dessert was served. "The weather here has been so gloomy," my mother sighed, passing around plates of apple pie. "Nothing like the sunshine in Nassau." My father nodded. Best vacation in years. Perfect timing, too, before the busy season. Nathan pulled out his phone. I got some great underwater shots I forgot to post. The coral reef tour was insane. They continued talking as if I wasn't there, as if there was nothing strange about discussing a family vacation I hadn't been part of. The normalcy of their exclusion was perhaps the most painful part. This wasn't new behavior. It was just the most obvious example of what had been happening my entire life. I set down my fork with a clink that seemed to echo in the room. Why wasn't I invited on the cruise? The conversation halted. My mother's hand froze midway through pouring coffee. My father suddenly became very interested in a spot on the tablecloth. Nathan glanced between them, waiting. What do you mean, dear? My mother finally asked, her voice falsely bright. The cruise, the family vacation to the Bahamas that you all took together. Why wasn't I invited? My voice remained steady, though my hands shook beneath the table. My father cleared his throat. It was really a spur-of-the-moment thing, Scarlett. We knew you were busy with work. No, it wasn't, I said, surprised by my own directness. I saw the booking dates in your photos. This was planned months in advance. Another silence fell. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Nathan studied his dessert intently. Then my mother set down her wineglass with deliberate care. The sound of crystal meeting wood seemed to mark a turning point. She looked directly at me, her expression no longer maintaining the pretense of warmth. Honestly, Scarlett, this trip was for people who matter to us. Nathan is carrying on the family legacy in finance. What have you contributed with your little drawings? The words struck like physical blows. People who matter. Little drawings. I looked to my father, waiting for him to object to defend me. He simply looked away. Nathan at least had the decency to appear uncomfortable. Mom, that's not fair, he mumbled, but then quickly changed the subject. Did anyone see that game last night? But I couldn't hear whatever came next. A rushing sound filled my ears, blood pounding so loudly I thought everyone must hear it. I felt dizzy, disconnected, as if I was floating above the table watching the scene unfold. Excuse me, I managed to say, standing up so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I need to go. Scarlett, don't be so sensitive, my mother called after me as I grabbed my purse. This is why we can't include you in things. You always make everything so dramatic. I didn't respond. Couldn't respond. I made it to my car before the tears came hot and fast down my cheeks. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and choked sobs. When I arrived at my apartment, its emptiness seemed to mock me. No photos of family vacations on my walls. No evidence of belonging anywhere. I collapsed on my sofa and finally let the full weight of the truth crash over me. My family had never seen me. Not really. Not as someone who mattered. That night I pulled out old family albums, examining photos with new eyes. There I was, on the edges of family photos never quite centered. There were the vacations where I was brought along but separated in activities. There were the holidays where Nathan's presence towered while mine were modest. The evidence had always been there, but I'd been too desperate for their love to acknowledge it. The pain was excruciating, but somewhere beneath it, something else was forming clarity. And with clarity came a decision. I called in sick to work the next morning. For once in my life, I prioritized my emotional well-being over my responsibilities. As morning light filtered through my curtains, I felt oddly calm. The tears had stopped, replaced by a strange sense of purpose. My first call was to Taylor, my closest friend and colleague. They said, "What?" she exclaimed when I related what had happened. Her outrage was both validating and comforting. "Scar, that's not normal. That's not what families do." I think I've always known something was wrong, I admitted. But hearing it stated so plainly, there's no more pretending now. "What are you going to do?" she asked. The question hung in the air. What was I going to do? Continue showing up for Sunday dinners, hoping for scraps of affection that would never come? Keep trying to prove my worth to people who had decided long ago that I had none? "I'm done," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "I'm setting boundaries. I'm walking away." That day became the first day of my new life. I methodically went through my apartment gathering photos and mementos. I didn't throw them away. That felt too much like erasing my own history. But I packed them into storage boxes and placed them in my closet. I took down the family photos from my walls, replacing the empty spaces with artwork that brought me joy. I changed my emergency contact information at work from my mother to Taylor. I called my doctor's office and removed my parents from my HIPAA forms. Small practical steps that felt enormous in their significance. Then I sat down to write. The letter took hours, draft after draft discarded, as I struggled to find the right words. How do you tell your family that you're letting them go? In the end, simplicity seemed best. Dear Mom, Dad and Nathan's Sunday night made it clear where I stand in this family. I've spent my entire life trying to earn your love, only to discover it was never available to me in the first place. I will no longer participate in a relationship where I'm treated as an afterthought. I need time and space away from all of you to heal from years of feeling invisible and unworthy. Please respect my decision by not contacting me. If and when I'm ready to reconnect, it will be on different terms, ones that include mutual respect. Scarlett. I sealed the letter in an envelope before I could second-guess myself. Then I took one final symbolic action. Finding a family photo from Christmas, cutting it precisely between Nathan and myself, and placing my half in a small frame on my bookshelf. A reminder of the decision I'd made. That evening, I blocked their numbers on my phone, removed them from social media, and sent a brief email to extended family, explaining that I was taking some time away from immediate family relationships and would appreciate respect for my privacy. I scheduled my first therapy appointment for the following week. The last thing I did before bed was delete my parents' contact information from my phone, after sending them a text with a photo of the letter. As I pressed delete on each entry, I felt both a profound sense of loss and an unexpected lightening, like putting down a heavy suitcase I'd been carrying for decades. That night I slept deeply for the first time in years. 1 month after cutting contact, I developed a new Sunday routine. Instead of preparing myself for family dinner, I took a morning yoga class, then spent afternoons exploring parts of Boston I'd never seen. Neighborhoods, museums, parks, places that had always been there, but that I'd never made time for while caught in the cycle of seeking approval. The first weeks weren't easy. My mother sent a barrage of texts before I blocked her, alternating between guilt trips, "How could you do this to us?" dismissals, "You're overreacting as usual," and bizarre rewriting of history. "We've always supported you more than Nathan." My father sent a single email with the subject line, "Be reasonable," containing just 3 sentences asking me to apologize to my mother for upsetting her. Nathan's response was more complex. He called several times before I blocked him, leaving voicemails that started with near apologies, but inevitably pivoted to defending our parents. "They just don't understand your art stuff," he said in one message. "They love you in their own way." His inability to acknowledge the fundamental inequity between us only confirmed my decision. Weekly therapy sessions became my anchor. Dr. Rivera helped me recognize patterns I'd never seen before, taught me about family dynamics and emotional neglect. "What you're describing is a classic golden child scapegoat dynamic," she explained during our second session. "It's not about you. It was never about you. It's about your parents' own issues and limitations." Those words were both painful and liberating. If it wasn't about me, then maybe I wasn't fundamentally unlovable. Maybe I deserved better. I found unexpected community in an art collective that met on Wednesday evenings, a diverse group of creators who celebrated each other's work without competition or judgment. The first time I shared a new design and received genuine, thoughtful feedback, I nearly cried from the unfamiliar feeling of being truly seen. My friendships deepened as I opened up about what I was going through. Taylor became a regular presence in my life, dropping by with takeout on difficult days. Work colleagues I'd kept at a distance became friends, as I learned to let people in without fear of rejection. Thanksgiving loomed as the first major holiday without family. I dreaded it until Taylor invited me to her Friendsgiving, a gathering of people without local family, or who like me needed a break from complicated family dynamics. "We're your chosen family," she told me, handing me a glass of wine in her small but warm apartment. Looking around at the faces of people who genuinely enjoyed my company, I felt something shift inside. Maybe family wasn't only about blood, maybe it could be about choice. My career flourished as I channeled my emotions into my work. I landed a major design contract for a national campaign earning recognition that would have previously sent me rushing to my parents for validation. Instead, I celebrated with my friends and treated myself to a weekend art retreat in the Berkshires. 6 months into my new life, I moved to a larger apartment in a neighborhood I'd always loved but considered too indulgent. I painted the walls colors that made me happy, hung art that inspired me, and created a home that reflected who I was, rather than who I'd tried to be for my parents' approval. I rediscovered passions I'd abandoned: photography, hiking, cooking, elaborate meals just for the joy of it. I started dating again, meeting Jordan at a gallery opening in December. Unlike previous relationships where I'd chosen partners I thought my parents would approve of, I allowed myself to be drawn to Jordan's creative spirit and gentle humor without second guessing. Christmas arrived with a mixture of melancholy and peace. Jordan and I volunteered at a community dinner, then spent the evening watching classic movies. When midnight struck, I realized I hadn't checked my phone once to see if my family had reached out. Progress small, but significant. The new year began with a party at Taylor's apartment surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was. At midnight, amid the cheers and hugs, I made a silent resolution this year would be about building the life I wanted, not mourning the family I never had. By the 6-month mark of no contact, the acute pain had subsided into something more complicated. Occasional waves of grief mixed with longer periods of contentment. I miss the idea of family more than my actual family. I miss belonging somewhere, but I was slowly creating that belonging on my own terms. 8 months into my self-imposed family exile, the boundaries I had carefully constructed were tested. I was in a client meeting when my assistant knocked urgently on the conference room door. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she whispered, "but there are 2 people in the lobby insisting on seeing you. They say they're your parents, and they won't leave until they talk to you." The familiar tightness returned to my chest, but it wasn't as debilitating as before. I excused myself from the meeting and called security instead of going to the lobby. My parents were escorted out after creating a scene that had my coworkers buzzing for days. The old Scarlett would have been mortified by the attention, but I found myself strangely unmoved. Their behavior was about them, not me. The incident triggered a flood of calls and messages from extended family members I hadn't heard from in months. Aunts, uncles, and cousins suddenly had strong opinions about my cruelty toward my heartbroken parents. It seemed my family had been spinning quite a narrative in my absence. "They said you had some kind of breakdown," my cousin Mia reported when I finally answered her call. "They've been telling everyone they're trying to help you, but you refuse treatment." The revelation should have angered me, but instead it solidified my resolve. The lengths they would go to avoid accountability only confirmed I'd made the right choice. The most surprising outreach came from Nathan's girlfriend Amanda, whom I'd only met twice. She called from a number I didn't recognize. "I know we don't really know each other," she began awkwardly, "but I thought you should know your parents are really struggling with this estrangement. Your mom's had some health issues, blood pressure problems." I felt the familiar pull of guilt, then recognized it for what it was: the trained response of someone raised to be responsible for others' emotions. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully, "but my boundaries aren't negotiable right now." After hanging up, I called my Aunt Sophia, my mother's sister who had distanced herself from the family years ago for reasons never explained. Our conversation was revelatory. "Your mother did the same thing to me," she said after I explained the situation. "I was always the problematic sister, the one who didn't fit into the family narrative. It's not you, Scarlett. It never was." Learning that my aunt had experienced similar treatment was both validating and heartbreaking. How many people had my parents discarded for failing to meet their impossible standards? The most disturbing development came 3 weeks later: a large package delivered to my apartment. Inside were family photo albums, my childhood art projects, and various mementos. The accompanying note from my mother read simply, "We've always loved you. Please come home." I sat on my living room floor surrounded by fragments of a childhood that looked so normal in photographs but felt so painful in memory. The pictures showed smiling faces at birthday parties, graduations, holidays, nothing to indicate the constant undercurrent of conditional love and comparison. These physical remnants of my past triggered a week of emotional turmoil. Jordan stayed over several nights holding me through tears and listening as I processed conflicting feelings. My therapist suggested an extra session. "They're trying to pull you back into the dynamic that worked for them," Dr. Rivera observed. "They're not acknowledging harm or offering change. They're just trying to restore the status quo." With her guidance, I drafted a brief, clear response letter. "Thank you for returning my childhood belongings. I am continuing to work through the impact of our family dynamic with professional help. My boundaries remain in place. Please respect them by not contacting me or coming to my workplace." I mailed the letter with a calm certainty that would have been impossible months earlier. The true test of my growth came a week later, when a prestigious design magazine featured my work in their annual innovation issue. In the past, I would have immediately sent the article to my parents, desperate for validation. Instead, I celebrated with Jordan and my friends, people who were genuinely happy for my success. I later learned through my aunt that my parents had somehow obtained a copy of the magazine and were showing it to their friends, speaking proudly of "our daughter, the designer," as if they'd been supportive all along. The news might once have infuriated me. Now it just reinforced what I already knew: my parents lived in a reality of their own creation, one where their narrative mattered more than actual relationships. I no longer needed to participate in that fiction. The 1-year anniversary of my decision to cut contact arrived on a crisp autumn day, much like the one when I'd driven away from that fateful Sunday dinner. I took the day off work and drove to my old neighborhood, parking a few blocks from my parents' house. I didn't intend to see them, just to observe the place that had shaped so much of my life from a new perspective. The colonial houses and tree-lined streets looked smaller, somehow less intimidating than in my memory. As I sat in my car, a familiar figure approached. Mrs. Winters, my parents' neighbor for decades. She spotted me and waved, coming over to my window. "Scarlett, what a lovely surprise. We haven't seen you in ages," she said warmly. "Hi, Mrs. Winters, just passing through," I replied, bracing for awkwardness. Her expression softened. "Your parents tell everyone you've abandoned them, you know, but I always wondered if there was more to the story. You were such a thoughtful child." Her insight caught me off guard. "There's usually more to every story," I said carefully. She nodded knowingly. "Take care of yourself, dear. That's what matters in the end." Her words stayed with me as I drove away, deciding spontaneously to text Nathan. Despite everything, he was the only person who understood what growing up in our family had been like, even if from a vastly different position. To my surprise, he agreed to meet for coffee the next day. We chose a neutral location, a cafe halfway between our workplaces. Nathan arrived looking less polished than usual, with shadows under his eyes, suggesting he wasn't sleeping well. "You look good," he said after an awkward greeting. "Happy even." "I am," I replied honestly. "Happier than I've been in a long time." We made small talk about work before he finally broached the subject of our parents. "They're telling everyone you had a mental breakdown," he admitted. "Dad's got this whole story about how your art career was too stressful and you snapped." I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still stung. "And what do you tell people?" He stared into his coffee. "Nothing usually. I don't know what to say." "You could tell the truth," I suggested. Nathan looked up, meeting my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in years. "The truth is, I benefited from how they treated you," he said quietly. "I knew it wasn't fair even when we were kids. I should have said something." His admission wasn't a complete apology, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd ever expected. We talked for 2 hours, pieces of our shared history examined from our different perspectives. Nathan revealed his own struggles with our parents' expectations, the pressure of being the golden child, the constant fear of disappointing them. "I'm sorry, Scar," he said as we prepared to leave. "I didn't understand how bad it was for you." I found I could respond with composure, rather than the anger that would have consumed me a year earlier. Thank you for saying that. I hope you can find your own boundaries with them. We parted with a tentative hug and a promise to meet again in a few months. It wasn't reconciliation exactly, but it was a step toward a different kind of relationship, one based on honesty rather than shared illusions. Life continued its forward momentum. I was promoted to creative director at my firm. Jordan proposed during a weekend trip to Maine with a vintage ring that suited me perfectly. We began planning a small wedding for the following spring. After much consideration and several intense therapy sessions, I sent my parents a brief note informing them of my engagement. I expected nothing and attached no invitation, simply notifying them of this life event as a courtesy. Their response arrived 2 weeks later, a small package containing a family heirloom bracelet and a card with my mother's handwriting. "We're happy for you. We've made mistakes. Congratulations on your engagement." The non-apology apology was exactly what Dr. Rivera had prepared me for. No acknowledgement of specific harms, no real accountability, just vague admissions designed to reopen the door without changing what lay beyond it. I kept the bracelet but did not respond to the note, nor did I send a wedding invitation. My chosen family filled the small coastal venue where Jordan and I exchanged vows, friends who had supported me through my darkest days, colleagues who had become friends, my Aunt Sophia, who had made the trip despite her own complicated feelings about family. As we celebrated into the evening, I looked around at the gathering of people who truly valued me, not for what I could do for them or how I reflected on them, but simply for who I was. The contrast with my blood family couldn't have been clearer. The final chapter of my healing journey came when Dr. Rivera suggested our weekly sessions could transition to monthly check-ins. "You've done the hard work," she told me in what would be our last regular session. "You've processed the grief, established healthy boundaries, and created a life aligned with your values." "What about forgiveness?" I asked. "Everyone says you have to forgive to move on." Her response gave me the freedom I didn't know I needed. "Forgiveness is for you, not them. It doesn't mean what they did was okay. It doesn't mean letting them back into your life. It means releasing the hope for a different past so you can embrace your future." 2 months after our wedding, Jordan and I prepared to move to Chicago for my dream job at an innovative design firm. As we packed our apartment, I came across the box of family mementos I'd stored away that first day of my new life. Looking through them now, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for the child who tried so hard to be loved, compassion for the young woman who finally walked away, gratitude for the journey that had led me here. The photos and keepsakes no longer held power over me. They were simply artifacts from a chapter of life that had closed. On our last night in Boston, we had dinner with Taylor and our closest friends. As we shared memories and made plans for future visits, I realized something profound: the opposite of rejection isn't acceptance. It's connection. Real, authentic connection with people who see you clearly and love you anyway. I had spent so many years trying to matter to people incapable of seeing my worth. Now I had built a life surrounded by those who did see me, who did value me, who did consider me someone who mattered. That night, Jordan and I walked along the harbor one last time. "Any regrets about leaving?" he asked, squeezing my hand. I thought about the question carefully. "No," I said finally. "Just gratitude for what I've learned. Sometimes the people who should love us the most simply can't or won't. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away and build something better." As the lights of Boston twinkled across the water, I felt a deep satisfaction in knowing I had created a life filled with genuine love and respect. Not because I had finally become worthy of it, but because I had always been worthy all along. Have you ever had to walk away from a relationship that was hurting you more than helping you? What gave you the strength to make that difficult choice? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to honor your own worth, whatever that looks like for you.